Hi, this is The Greatest Story Ever Played. I'm Dan, and today I'm going to be talking about The Unfinished Swan. A little description for this game is explore a mysterious, all-white landscape by splatting paint to reveal the world around you. As Monroe, a 10-year-old orphan, you'll follow a swan that stepped out of an unfinished painting and wandered off into a surreal, storybook-inspired kingdom. Each chapter brings surprises, new ways to explore the world, a host of bizarre and sometimes dangerous creatures, and encounters with an eccentric king who has built this empire. Okay, a little bit of background on the game. This was developed by Giant Sparrow. This was their first game, but they're primarily known for What Remains of Edith Finch. That's their second game, and these are the only two games they've developed so far. And also, as mentioned in the description, this game is told in the style of a children's storybook. So, kind of as you play it, I think there's 4 chapters in total with some sub-chapters within them, but each one it'll be like, this is the name of here's the chapter, and it's narrated by a woman who is reading you the story, essentially. So, like, once there was a king who blah, 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 blah. That's really how this whole game is set up, and throughout the game, as you do things, you'll get to points where you see a page on the book, and you'll hit it, and it will read you the couple sentences of it. So it really feels a lot like a storybook that you're getting to kind of play through, which is pretty cool. It's pretty unique. For anyone that's played What Remains of Edith Finch, they knew that game. You guys know that game is pretty unique in itself. This game likewise is, and you can kind of see that, like, this is where they started. And then, some of the things they learned from this, I think, being able to use them in Edith Finch. So, I don't know. It's pretty cool in that regard. So, I guess with this, we will jump into the recap, kind of go through main points or main things in the game. Okay, so game starts off. We find out that Monroe's mother was a painter who was renowned for never finishing her paintings. That she had over 300 paintings that she had started, but just hadn't got around to finishing. And when she died, the orphanage, who took in Monroe, said he could only keep one of the paintings, that there's not enough room for you to keep all your mother's artwork, so choose one. Monroe decides to keep a picture of the unfinished swan. And one night, after Monroe has gone to sleep, he sees the swan has escaped its painting. And so he follows after it. He sees like a hallway he'd never seen before, and he'd seen the swan go that way, and so he heads after it. And what you end up having in this game also is Monroe following the swan kind of through this new world he's encountered. It almost feels like the Chronicles of Narnia with the wardrobe. There's a little bit of a sense of that, where it's you were in reality, but then you were able to jump into this fantasy world, and you're kind of exploring this world. There's a little bit of that feel to it. So, Monroe finds himself in this new world, and at first, it's all white, which is crazy. When you first walk in, you don't see any shapes, you don't see anything. It's just white all over, and you're like, where am I? What's going on? But you start to throw ink balls to reveal the settings. So you start throwing them, and you start to see walls and trees and different things like that. And so it sets up this cool mechanic where you can see what's in front of you, basically 1 or 2 steps, by throwing ink blots kind of everywhere. And you're like, okay, it wants me to go this way, or it wants me to go that way. It's pretty cool, unique. I don't think I've played a game that is like this before. And so you start to reveal the landscape you're in, and it looks very cool also, for what it's worth. As you do this, you kind of explore to the world, and you end up arriving at a castle. You're told that the king has kept the world all white because no color would be good enough to color his world with. None of the colors that exist are up to his standard. So the king is trying to think of a new color that his kingdom can be to make it officially good. So that's why it's all white right now. Is I haven't figured that out yet, so I'm going to keep it as is. As you explore more, you find out that people were upset with the king due to the lack of color because they'd run into stuff all the time. They'd trip over stairs, they'd trip over chairs, they'd fall downstairs, all that sort of stuff. And makes sense. If you live in a world that is all white and you cannot see anything, you are going to run into things. The people are upset, so the king says, fine, I'll paint shadows for everything so you can see stuff. So some of it will be white and some of it will be a little darker. So you'll be able to know there's a chair, those are the stairs, etc. After a while, the king creates a maze. The people don't like it. His maze is complicated, the narrator comments that mail was always late, that mailmen would get stuck in the maze for weeks at a time, different things like that. So there's just sort of chaos by the king not having structure that made sense, sort of thing. But the people don't like it, and so eventually the king is fed up with the people and leaves. He's like, fine, I want to have subjects who aren't annoying, so I'm going to set sail, make a new kingdom, and have not annoying subjects. So the king sets sail. Monroe himself, he jumps into a hot air balloon that ends up taking him to this new city. When Monroe arrives at the new city, he sees a sleeping giant who is very lazy. He's been sleeping near the town, and he just sleeps all day. He doesn't do anything. And this new city has been flooded. A game mechanic that changes here is instead of throwing ink balls, you instead throw balls of water. And so as you go around this new city, you actually use water to throw at the vines, and the vines get bigger when you give them water, and you use the vines to travel the city. So again, it's a pretty cool mechanic again, where it's, I throw the water at the vine gets bigger, the vine gets where I need to go, I climb up the vine, that kind of thing. So again, just a new way of exploring your new scenery that's pretty cool, pretty interesting. After a while here, Monroe sets sail again, and when he does, he gets stuck in a dark rain cloud. And so you can't see anything, it goes black, and Monroe crash lands into this dark forest. Here, our game mechanic does switch back to the ink from the water, and you travel through this dark forest, and this dark forest is legitimately creepy. It's all dark. The whole game before this, of course, has been very bright. The all-white city, and then the shadowed city, and then the white city with blue water through it. But really, it's been a very bright game before this. But then dark forest is where you end up next, and it's creepy. You walk through the dark forest. There are these hanging lights that are kind of scattered throughout. And also there are scary spiders lurking in the shadows. And the hanging lights, the lights keep the spiders away. So if you're inside the light, the spiders won't hurt you. But if you are in the dark, the spiders can attack you. The first time I got attacked by a spider, it scared the shit out of me because I was just kind of roaming along. I didn't know I could be attacked. It attacks, but also it makes like a really scary attack noise, like that, except it came through my controller, so I just jumped back on my couch when it happened. I was like, oh fuck, definitely scary. I did not expect that. So scary spiders. I think if you get bit a couple times, you die and it makes you respawn, so it's kind of crazy. Ultimately, you make your way following the hanging lights to a river, and you go down the river with a hanging light with you. So one gets knocked into, you end up having one hanging light that is on the ground, and so it rolls along the ground and you follow it till it gets in the river. It's in the river and you run alongside the river with it, and it's keeping you in its in its light, so you're not being attacked by spiders. But if you are too slow or too fast in front of your light, then you'll get bit by spiders. So it's a timing exercise for sure. After this, we learn that the king wanted to start a family, but he couldn't find anyone to marry. none of the people he'd ever met had been that great. They were all annoying and complainers. And so he decided to create a wife for himself. And he ended up creating a female version of himself who he fell in love with. That is who he could love. And through here too, there's a new mechanic that gets created that's pretty cool, which is you create block shapes to travel around. So it's kind of cool. You like throw a ball at one point, and then you throw a ball at another point, and then that's how large your block you're going to jump to is, and then you can like stretch how long it is or how high it is. So it's pretty cool as you like essentially like create staircases and things like that for yourself to get to your next spot. So again, another like cool mechanic that gets introduced. After traveling with your blocks that you end up kind of building through, you see a giant monument to the king. So the king, has had all these different things not work out. And so he's like, okay, if I build a monument so big of myself, then of course I'll be remembered. And so you see the giant monument and you approach it. And as you approach, you have to deal with various traps leading up to the monument. There's like a metal ladder with a bunch of the kind of car clamps that you use to like jumpstart your car. I forget the name of that right now. But like those are around. And so you have to like undo the box to unelectrify it. So you like do that. As you're moving closer, there's like a fast water rising section. So the king has made it hard to approach his monument, but you go through these obstacles, you make it there, and you end up climbing inside the monument. When you get into the monument, the king's there, and he wakes up. And he begins to give you his origin story. He says, yeah, I started off doing this, but then due to this issue, this other thing happens. Due to this issue, someone was in my town and they threw paint everywhere and made it all dirty. Someone was in my city and they filled it with water. All of these kind of problems he's encountered. And it's also cool because it gets pretty meta here. Like there's a part where he says, yeah, this is where like the credits begin. And you see, the giant Sparrow team start to get listed, and you're like, wait, are your stories always have credits? And he's like, oh yeah, they're also always subtitled, and the whole game's had subtitles and that kind of thing. So it's pretty funny. It's like a good meta thing for sure. Ultimately, the king tells you about everything he's kind of done, and he hands you his paintbrush. And is like, I knew I would do this, that everything I created, that it wouldn't last forever, because when someone came to replace me someday, they would become the creator. Just like me, before I became king, I drew over all the creations someone else once did. So he hands the paintbrush to Monroe and says, okay, you can go back home, but you're the king now, essentially. And the game ends. So I had a few general thoughts on the game itself. One thing is I really, really liked the children book style that the game had. I've never played a game that's this way, but I really liked it. It was super engaging how it was. Also, the story was pretty funny. I thought the narrator did a good job. I don't know. It felt very much so like being read a children's story, except it's a little crazier. But it felt a lot like that. Like there's a part where the king is told. It says the king likes working with clay. That he makes pots, and all the people began demanding for him to create like an aqueduct system so they could use the restroom. And the king said, "No, I don't want to." However, when the people started relieving themselves in his pots, he got the aqueduct made. So it's funny, like just little comments like that are silly, and I think just enjoying a kid's book, it felt a lot like that. They really captured that. I would imagine that in creating this game, they read a lot of children's books to get kind of the feel of how they go and the kind of jokes they make or little offhand things that are fun, because it very much so felt that way, which was great. Secondly, is I thought this game was highly creative, super, super creative, and can see how Edith Finch really built off of this. This game, I think, used its mechanics, as I mentioned, a lot to creatively tell their story, whether it was throwing the ink blots at the white landscape to kind of reveal what was there, or throwing the water at the vines to grow them, or creating shapes to jump about, or running alongside the lights to not be bit by the spiders. Like all these different little things that were pretty unique, and most of I haven't particularly seen in a lot of games in my experience. So that's pretty cool, and you can just see on the other side, the story was probably a little bit more lacking. And I don't know, as a children's book, I guess it doesn't need, children's books aren't like esteemed works of literature regularly. That's not their goal. It's to be enjoyable for a child. And this certainly met that. But with Edith Finch, you can see how they had their cool game mechanics again, but they added an even stronger story. And I think for me, really seeing the growth of Giant Sparrow's like team and skills and all that stuff from Unfinished Swan to Edith Finch, What Remains of Edith Finch, is incredible. It's very, very good. And because of this, I will 100% buy any game Giant Sparrow puts out in the future. After playing both of their games, they're clearly very good at what they do. I would like them to have my money. And yeah, whatever game comes up next, I will most certainly be buying it and will most certainly be podcasting on it. Day one kind of deal. Like, it's great. They're very, very good at what they do. So I really like that. Yeah, super impressive. Really enjoyed that. A cool piece of trivia I was reading about is Milton from Edith Finch is actually the king in this. And this was confirmed by Ian Dallas, who's like the creative director of Giant Sparrow. I think he's kind of the big idea guy of sorts, and he confirmed this, so I'd read that somewhere, which I thought was pretty cool to see again, too, that their games are connected. I don't know if if they make a third game, or hopefully they do, if that will also have connections to either game, but that would be fun. After reading that, too, I went back and watched the Milton segment from Edith Finch, and all the things in his room, like so many of the things either were directly from Unfinished Swan or were really evocative of them. Like, something that happens in the Unfinished Swan is you are chasing after the swan throughout the whole game, and there's little yellow feet on the ground to kind of show you what way you need to go to follow the swan. Inside Milton's room, there are yellow footprints, like, all about inside there. So you can really see, like, Milton and the king, and just how that fit. Also in the Edith Finch one, Milton is the kid that went missing. So it says, Edith comments, Milton went missing when I was 4. He was never seen again, or something like that. So, like, there's just this feel of the connectivity, which is pretty cool. Like, I really, really liked that and thought that was super well done. So I like that quite a bit. I guess lastly, to wrap up with a little bit of listener feedback, Sabrina on Twitter said, this was enjoyable, but comes up short of that certain something that would make it great. And I think that's fair. I wouldn't quite call this game great, similarly. I think it's quite good, and as commented, I can see how Edith Finch kind of took stuff and bounced from it, because to me, Edith Finch is truly great. Fantastic, wonderful, unbelievable game. Unfinished Swan is very good, and I would also argue is a work of art also. Like, if you were gonna, those debates people sometimes have of, are video games art or not? This one I think should be thrown in that camp. It's unique, it's pretty cool. I was playing Unfinished Swan, actually, and my wife sat down and watched for a second. She doesn't play games, is not particularly interested in them, but she was like, oh, this is pretty cool, and she, like, laughed at some of the story things, and, like, reasonably seemed to enjoy it. Like, I could see this being a game that people who don't play video games typically could enjoy, which is cool, because you can't really get stuck too much for the most part. It's pretty easy and straightforward. So, yeah, definitely cool. Next up, we have Fred on Twitter who said, I found it visually very arresting. Liked the way it built up some unusual gameplay ideas, but did think it was somehow a bit slight. It ends up delivering some hardly earth-shaking ideas in a fairly drab way. A good shot at greatness, I think that's fair to say. It seems like Fred is pretty similar to Sabrina in comments of they did try some great things, they did do some cool things, but there's just a something that's missing that makes greatness elude it. And yeah, I think that is totally fair. Fair assessment. Pretty good game, not quite at greatness, but I do agree too that they did seem to shoot for greatness. They weren't trying to be just another game that someone else has, but it does seem like they were really trying to do something big, and they accomplished a lot of it, which is cool. That is something that is noteworthy. So, yeah, I guess all in all, that is The Unfinished Swan. If you have any comments or anything you'd like to talk about with The Unfinished Swan, definitely hit me up. I'd be interested to talk more about this game. A couple ways you can do that. You can follow us on Twitter at StoryEverPod. Also, our website is TheGreatestStoryEverPlayed.com. And there you have access to all of our episodes we've done on other things. I did one on Edith Finch maybe a year and a half ago, something like that. But definitely check that out. I really love that game. But yeah, there's that. If you'd like to financially support the podcast, you could do that by going to patreon.com/TheGreatestStoryEverPlayed. If you decide to give as little as $1 per month, that will give you access to bonus episodes that we exclusively only put on our Patreon. And those are topical in nature. We talked about our favorite video game franchises most recently. We talked about our favorite Pokemon before. We ranked the Life is Strange episodes. Just stuff like that. If you would like to support the podcast, but you are unable to financially, that's totally cool. Totally get that. We would really appreciate it if you would rate and review us, either on Apple Podcast or Podchaser or wherever else you get your podcast. That would be super helpful just to, boost our visibility for other people who love the games we do to, come together. Here. So, I guess that's all I've got. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you next time.